welcome to the Holy Land and this newly discovered biblical site of Bethsaida. So I can't tell you how excited I am to be here. 2 years ago, my wife and I stumbled upon this site. We just wanted to take some air drone of the inlet of the Jordan River. So we just drove down here, found this spot, and we're doing our drones, walked down over there a ways. They decided to begin excavations here, believing that this was the true biblical site of Bethsaida. This is a brand new dig, and they will continue this on as they have time and resources, but this is the believed site of Bethsaida. And I think as we go through this, you'll agree that it is as well. So at this biblical site, we'll be looking at the location of this place and why that's so important. We'll talk about the historical background of this location. We'll be looking at some of the amazing places of interest at this site. We'll see the key events in the Bible that took place here, and we'll end with a faith lesson in order to learn the major lessons God desires from us at this important biblical site. So I think you'll find this video very enlightening and transforming to your life. Now, there are currently two main candidates for the true biblical Bethsaida location. The first is the traditional site that has been excavated from 1987 to the present. It sits upon a hill and is located about 1.5 miles or about 2.25 kilometers from the high water mark of the Sea of Galilee. Because there were no other sites excavated besides this first site, it became the default site. Their traditional site is also known as Et Tel. A number of years ago, we did a video about their traditional site because at the time it was the only site available. However, we have changed our position now and believe this new site is the best candidate for the true biblical Bethsaida location. This new site is also known as El Araj. Now, Edward Robinson first identified the site of Et Tel as the possible site of biblical Bethsaida in 1841. However, in 1888, Gottlieb Schumacher challenged Robinson's proposed site because it was too far from the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee. He proposed the site of El Araj as the true location. Like Schumacher, today some archaeologists and historians like Mordecai Aviam, Stephen Notley, and Mark Turnage are not convinced the traditional site of Et Tel is the true location of Bethsaida for two main reasons. The first problem has to do with the distance Et Tel is from the Sea of Galilee. It is just a long ways away and doesn't fit the biblical, historical, and eyewitness accounts that clearly point to Bethsaida being right next to the sea. The traditional site is about 100 feet or 30 meters above the high water level mark of the Sea of Galilee. Now, some have suggested to answer this question that the traditional site was close to the sea. They've suggested that the water level was a lot higher. So back in Jesus' day, they would say, their argument would be, is that the water level was much higher, and therefore the traditional site was on right next to the Sea of Galilee. They proposed that the Sea of Galilee was around 16 feet or 5 meters higher than the high water mark that exists today. However, that presents an impossibility in that there are other towns along the Sea of Galilee, like Magdala, like Gennesaret, like Capernaum, that are right at sea level or right at the sea right now. So if the Sea of Galilee level would have been higher, those towns would have been underwater. So that's not a strong argument. It's a very, very weak argument. Again, you can see here how it would have been impossible for the Sea of Galilee to have been 16 feet or 5 meters higher than the high water mark, and that it would have covered other known towns like Magdala, Gennesaret, Capernaum, and the newly discovered site of Bethsaida that existed during the time of Christ and are located right next to the high water mark of the Sea of Galilee. The reality is that the sea level, or the level of the Sea of Galilee, has not changed since the time of Jesus. It's just been at the same level, and you can see from all of the historical evidence that that's the case. Now, new archaeological evidence is pointing to this new location for Bethsaida, and it places it right on the Sea of Galilee. In fact, we'll step over in a moment, and just right behind me is the Jordan River. Okay, so this would fit it. It fits well. It's high enough that it wouldn't be flooded, the water, because at the southern tip of the Sea of Galilee is an outlet, so it's a lake. It's not a reservoir. So a lake, water comes in and water goes out, right? That's been the same for thousands of years. So the water level, sometimes it will go down a little bit if they're in dry seasons, but it's not going to go up any higher. Why? Because it's got a natural outlet that's going to prevent that. So it cannot flood. So once again, it's going to stay at this level or lower. I should mention that a dam was built in 1930 at the outlet of the Sea of Galilee that allows Israel to regulate the water flow. As a result, today the water level of the sea can rise higher than it could have during the time of Christ. In recent years, due to heavy rainfall, the sea has risen higher than previous years. And you can see some media here of how the sea level is higher than it would have been during the time of Christ. However, as mentioned, during the time of Christ, the outlet prevented the sea from rising higher than the high level water mark found around the shoreline. Therefore, the traditional site has real problems as it is so far from the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee. The second problem has to do with a lack of Roman archaeology found at the traditional site of Bethsaida. Josephus, a Jewish historian, writes about how Bethsaida was converted into a polis, or a Roman city, in the 1st century AD and was urbanized. He says, "And to the village of Bethsaida, located next to the lake of Gennesaret, or the Sea of Galilee, Herod Philip granted the dignity of the city by introducing a multitude of inhabitants and other fortifications, and he called it Julias, after the name of the daughter of the emperor. There have not been found any substantial remains of a Roman settlement at Et-Tel. Its ruins are mainly from the time of King David and Solomon. It has an impressive 6-chamber gate that was common during the time of Solomon as well." Now, Jody Magnus from UNC speaks about the lack of Roman ruins at Et-Tel. She says, "While the Iron Age remains at Bethsaida or Et-Tel are monumental and impressive, the Roman period remains are very poor, and therefore the site does not look like an urban center." So once again, what we see at Et-Tel comes more from the time of King David and afterward. It is an Iron Age city, and it has no evidence or very little of any Roman occupation. For these two reasons, the traditional site of Bethsaida has been questioned as the true site by some. We agree and now believe the new site of El Araj is the true location of biblical Bethsaida. This second and newest site is the one here where we are filming. As mentioned, it is called El Araj. The Israelis also know the site by a different name. They call it Bet Habek, which means the Habek house, and was named after a Kurdish aristocrat who lived here in the 19th and 20th centuries. Some of the ruins of the villa can still be seen today. The site of El Araj is being excavated under the leadership of Professor Mordecai Aviam. Also, Dr. Stephen Notley is the academic and historical director at the site. Mark Turnage also provides assistance as well. The excavation process at El Araj started in 2014 when Mark Turnage organized what is called a shovel survey under the leadership of Aviam Mordecai and Stephen Notley. This involved digging and sifting the soil from several 5-meter by 5-meter squares to a depth of about a foot or 30 centimeters. More serious excavations began in 2016 and continue to the present. Now let's look at some of the evidence that supports this site of El Araj as the best candidate for biblical Bethsaida. We will first look at the biblical accounts, then the eyewitness accounts, and then the archaeological evidence that matches wonderfully with the Bible and these historical and eyewitness descriptions. Now let's start with the biblical account. According to the Bible, Bethsaida was located right beside the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus repeatedly traveled to and from it by boat. Now we know from the Bible that Bethsaida was in a desolate side of the Sea of Galilee, so this is the desolate side. So Bethsaida was somewhere here on the northeastern side of the Sea of Galilee. It says in Luke 9:10, the apostles, when they had returned, told him what things they had done. He took them and withdrew apart to a deserted place of a city called Bethsaida. So after they've been sent out 2 by 2, they come over to this deserted place called Bethsaida. So this fits the biblical narrative. It was a deserted place. Now the northwestern side of the Sea of Galilee is the populated side. So Bethsaida would have to be on the eastern side or the northeastern side because that's the desolate, deserted place. Now Bethsaida was a fishing village on the Sea of Galilee. In fact, its name means house. Beth is house, and Saida is fishing. So it was a fishing village, and it was right on the Sea of Galilee. So Bethsaida was a fishing village, and so the traditional site just seems a long ways away. It's not by the sea. It just wouldn't be a fishing village several miles away or several kilometers away. In John 1:44, we find that at least 3 of the disciples were from and lived right here in Bethsaida. Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. And we also know that at least Peter and Andrew were fishermen. So they lived in Bethsaida to be close to the sea. So once again, a fisherman, a fishing village would not be several miles away. People would not do that. They would get up early in the morning. They're not going to walk for a half hour or farther to fish, and they're not going to drag all their fish 2 or 3 miles or several kilometers away. So once again, the traditional site just doesn't seem to fit the text when you read it carefully. We'll step over here in a moment and you can see the Jordan River right here, because it's getting right next, it's getting wider. So it would be perfect. It would be exactly what you'd want, because when the storms and stuff come, you want your boat in a little harbor, right? So this is going to be in a nice little inlet here in a harbor. And also, you fishermen know that inlets to lakes is the hot spot, right? So this would be the hot spot. So once again, it's a beautiful fit. It just fits the text so wonderfully. Well, if you guys want, we can step right over here. It'd be nice to get a little bit of footage of it. Well, here we are at by the tell, or by the area here of Bethsaida. We wanted you to show it's just a stone's throw away from where the archaeological dig is. It's believed to be Bethsaida. And here's the Jordan River right here. So it would be a natural place for Peter and the disciples to bring the boats right here in this fishing village of Bethsaida. They could come right in here, park their boats right here. Also, this is gorgeous fishing right here. The river is wide here. And in fact, what's amazing, we just came down here, but some families are here, some Jewish families are here, and guess what they're doing? You'll see here in a moment, they're fishing. So once again, Bethsaida was a fishing village, and the boats would come in here, could harbor up, and then go out, in and out, and also they would fish along here really well. So this new Bethsaida location just really fits the biblical text so wonderfully. And like I say, you'll see here in a moment, but we got some Jewish families that have come here to camp out, and we got some children here fishing, doing the same thing that Peter and Andrew did 2,000 years ago. So not a lot's changed. Got a beautiful sunset going down. It's really pleasant and beautiful here, so just wanted to show you some of this footage here. Now let's see the historical and eyewitness accounts of the history of Bethsaida. As mentioned, Josephus, a Jewish historian, wrote about how Bethsaida was converted into a polis or a Roman city in the 1st century AD and urbanized. He wrote about how Bethsaida was located next to the lake of Gennesaret or the Sea of Galilee, and how Herod Philip, once again, converted Bethsaida into a Roman polis city and called it Julias after the name of the daughter of the emperor. And then also Pliny the Elder, a 1st century Roman writer, called Bethsaida one of the 4 lovely cities on the Sea of Galilee. So you have a historical writer saying that it was right on the sea. Later, Eusebius, in 305 AD, wrote about Bethsaida. He said, "The city of Andrew and Peter and Philip. It is located in the Galilee next to the lake of Gennesaret or the Sea of Galilee." Finally, we have a key testimony recorded of Willibald, a bishop of Bavaria, in 725 AD that speaks of a church being built at this site during the Byzantine period. From Tiberias, they went around the sea by the village of Magdala to the village of Capernaum, where our Lord raised the prince's daughter. And from Capernaum, they went to Bethsaida, from which came Peter and Andrew. There is now a church where previously there was a house. Evidence of this church and a monastery have been discovered at this site, and we will see more about this amazing discovery in a bit. From these biblical, historical, and eyewitness accounts, we learn the following about the location of Bethsaida. 1. During the time of Christ, it was a Jewish community. 2. Peter, Andrew, and Philip originally lived in Bethsaida. 3. It was located right beside the Sea of Galilee, right on its shores. 4. Its name means fishing village. 5. Jesus sailed to and from it regularly. 6. Bethsaida was converted into a Roman polis city in the 1st century and urbanized. 7. Later, there was a Byzantine church built over the home of Peter and Andrew in the 4th century that was still visible in 725 AD by Willibald. Now, this new Bethsaida location here at El Araj fulfills all these descriptions and discoveries that should exist at the true biblical Bethsaida location. Now let's look at the archaeological discoveries from this site that match perfectly with the biblical, historical, and eyewitness accounts. There are 3 main excavations happening at this site. There is the main area that is called Area A, which began in 2014. Then Area B, which began in 2016, which is located about 50 meters east of Area A. In 2019, a third area called Area C was begun, which is located about 100 meters north of Area A. From the Jewish settlement period, we find walls and plasterings from the 1st century, pottery, oil lamps, 1st century coins, stone vessels used by Jews in purification rituals, limestone dishes, and knife-paired Herodian lamps, which were only made in Jerusalem prior to 70 AD. This presents clear indications of Jewish settlement at El Araj. We have 1st century homes also discovered in Area C, lead fishing weights, Galilean pottery. 2 capitals were unearthed that resembled those found in use in other synagogues. A lioness was also found, which is common in Jewish communities.
A couple of things that we found, in additionally to these smaller elements, are artifacts that were found here. A couple of capitals that are indicative of Jewish synagogues, Second Temple period, 1st century. And we found capitals which again speaks to us of a Jewish presence. And of course the famous lioness of El Araj was uncovered by accident last winter. Basalt lioness, according to the scholars in the Golan, we're in the area of the lower Golan, but in the Golan area, 95% of the lionesses that are found, stone lionesses are found, come from a Jewish context. They speak to a Jewish community.
From the Roman period, we find a key discovery, which was a Roman bathhouse that had small tiles and mosaics. This bathhouse had an elaborate heating system and was used as a sauna. It proves Bethsaida was converted into a Roman polis, as bathhouses of this nature were not found in Jewish communities. This Roman bathhouse dates to the 1st century AD and proves the water level was exactly where the Bible indicates it would have been during the time of Christ, and that Bethsaida and the other towns around the Sea of Galilee are on the shoreline as the Bible and archaeology describes them to be. This discovery presents even more problems for the site of Et-Tel, as we can see that this bathhouse and these discoveries prove that the high-level watermark of the Sea of Galilee was not higher than what it was during the time of Christ. Area C was opened up in 2019 and shows Bethsaida was a large Roman city that was described by Josephus as Julius. A Roman coin from the Roman emperor dating to 66 AD was discovered as well. In the 4th century AD, a Byzantine church and monastery were built over the home of Peter and Andrew. Now a 30-meter Byzantine wall of the monastery has been found. A cross was discovered on a Byzantine vessel. The church described by Willibald was discovered. It was quite elaborate and had mosaic floors. Now just part of this church has been exposed, and more will be exposed later. Individual gold-gilded glass tesserae, which are only found in wall mosaics of ornate churches, were also found. A Byzantine frieze was found as well, and the base of a chancel screen was discovered.
In this season, in this square, they came upon a chancel, the base for a chancel screen. That is a screen in a church separating the congregation from the area where the priest would celebrate the Eucharist at the altar. And we came across unearthed this base to the chancel screen out of marble. In an earlier time, nearby, in another square close by, we actually found also a portion of marble which has been worked. Seems also to have been part of the chancel screen. It doesn't match the groove right in here, but it seems to be the same material used for the same purpose. Both of these speak to the church that is here. Moti Aviam suggests that the complex that we have on this site is a monastery church. That means that there was a monastery with individuals living in it, and their focus was hospitality, meeting pilgrims who would come and visit the church and remember Bethsaida, the place of the home of Peter and Andrew.
In 2019, the excavation team stood side by side to form the outline of what the Byzantine church would have looked like. Lord willing, in the coming years, the church and monastery will be completely uncovered for all to see. Lastly, there is also a Crusader presence found at this site as well. There have been discovered sugar bowls from a sugar plantation, a glass vase piece, a ring, among other discoveries. At the end of the excavations done in 2019, a geophysical study was conducted in the vicinity using electromagnetic sensors operated on the ground and from a drone. The results indicate that this site is quite large and there are many homes and buildings buried that are waiting to be uncovered and tell their story. So according to all the biblical, historical, eyewitness accounts And the archaeology, this new site of Bethsaida at El Araj here fits wonderfully with the true site of biblical Bethsaida. Now, regarding this site of El Araj being the true location of biblical Bethsaida, Dr. Stephen Notley says the following: every day, the argument gets stronger and stronger. You know, we are preparing. We are coming to the point where you say there's no question now. The question mark is finished. We're on the site of Bethsaida truly. What are some things that happened right here in Bethsaida? Bethsaida, once again, was a fishing village, and it probably had a population of 500 or so. We don't know exactly. And we find that 3 disciples were from here. It says in John 1:44, now Philip was from Bethsaida, of the city of Andrew and Peter. And then later on, however, these disciples who grew up here and chose to follow Christ, then they moved to Capernaum and lived there. Why? Because that's where Jesus set up his ministry base. So they were from here originally, grew up here, but then when they chose to follow Christ, they moved to Capernaum to be with him. It says in Mark 1:21, and they went to Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and was preaching. It's talking about Jesus. Then right after that it says in Mark 1:28, and immediately he left the synagogue and entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. And at once his fame spread everywhere throughout all the surrounding region. So they went to Capernaum. Jesus healed Peter's mother, who was in Capernaum. So we know that Peter now lived in Capernaum where Jesus was at. Well, Jesus healed a blind man right here in Bethsaida. It says in Mark 8:22, and they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked, do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see people, but they look like trees, walking. Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. So a blind man was healed right here. Now, Bethsaida also was one of the 3 cities that Jesus cursed: Chorazin, Capernaum, and Bethsaida. And we were at Capernaum. The only thing that exists there are ruins, an ancient synagogue, and the Franciscan church there. Many people go to Capernaum, but it's in ruins, right? You'll see Chorazin, ruins. And what do you see here? So when Jesus cursed these cities, he meant business. And we can learn from his curse that God always keeps his word. He doesn't negotiate. It's a serious thing. It says in Matthew 11:21, woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works had been done in Tyre and Sidon, to the north, which were done in you, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. And it was close to Bethsaida where Christ fed the 5,000. So we've just come from that area. And so the disciples were originally coming here, but they went a little bit farther south, and that's where the miracle of the 5,000 took place. And not far from Bethsaida is where Jesus walked on the water and calmed the sea. And it says after the feeding of the 5,000 that they were coming towards Bethsaida, but then a storm arose, and then they were pushed out into the sea farther, and that's where Jesus walked on the water, was farther out there. So what are some faith lessons that we can take away here from Bethsaida? Well, like the healing of the blind man, often Jesus heals in different and strange ways. So he spit on the ground and made this mud, put it on his eyes, and he says, can you see? He says, well, I can just see like people with like their trees walking around. So he does this again, and then his eyes are restored. That's a strange way to get healed. I mean, Jesus oftentimes just touched. He would heal from distances. So oftentimes what God does and the way he heals might not make sense to us, but in the final result, there is healing. Now, Bethsaida, as we mentioned, is one of the cursed towns, and because the people were hard-hearted and apathetic and failed to obey him and believe that he was a Messiah, he cursed them. And oftentimes we as well can be slow to trust the Lord, and we can also have hard heart as well. And then Christ fed the 5,000 in this area to reveal that He was the true bread of life from heaven. So in the same way that there were 12 baskets of food left over, Christ is the bread of heaven, and He revealed even in that miracle of the 5,000, there was this overabundance. So when Christ provides food, it's always abundant. And also then not far from Bethsaida is where Jesus walked on the water and calmed the sea. And He said to Peter, "Oh, you of little faith." So I guess a question for us would be, is Christ walked on the water, and Peter did for a bit as well, but am I finding rest and peace in the storms of my life with Christ? And I'll end with this verse right here. In Isaiah 26:3 it says, "You keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord God is an everlasting rock." So as we know, when Jesus walked on the water, then Peter did for some time, it says he doubted and took his eyes off Jesus, and then he went down into the water. But it says here that you will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you. So those whose minds are stayed on Christ will not be like Peter, who doubted and then fell away from Christ. He will keep you in perfect peace as you keep your mind stayed on Him in whatever circumstance it might be, because he trusts in the Lord forever, for the Lord God is an everlasting rock, firm. I hope you enjoyed this, and you're at a brand new site. And that's the neat thing about Israel, is there's just stuff going on all the time. Anyway, so God bless you, and thanks for watching.